We're going to diverge from political tonight for a little bit of time because we want to talk about a very, very important issue. Like so many issues, we refer to here at the Coalition as an onion issue, and that there are many, many, many layers. Special education has a variety of formats, a wide variety of needs, and a wide variety of faces here in Rhode Island. Special education is a term that I believe has become almost a pejorative. Education needs to be geared to the individual student. Not all students learn in the same dogmatic manner. Just like standardized tests for so many are such a complete waste of efforts. Mandatory standardized testing does little to serve the body politic, does little to serve the taxpayer, does even less to serve the student, given our near-death wish obsession with it. In the same token, though, we need to understand that the students in our community, if in fact we are going to limit ourselves to public schools, and that's a conversation for another time, another place, deserve the very best that we as a citizenry can afford them. It's really quite selfish when you think about it. They are our future. In the future, I would like to see a variety of educational formats provided for students who learn differently. But in the interim, we have to, my words, not the guest I'm about to introduce, my words, suffer through a system that we have in place now. So what we're going to discuss tonight is one aspect of what I'll call special education, and a parent's trials and tribulations, a parent's innate desire to do the very best for their children that they can, and then, as so often, and I believe perhaps one of the most patriotic forms of civil involvement, is to take the issue beyond their own doors, their own home, and try to do better for the community at large. As a libertarian, I believe in participatory democracy. That is more than just people complaining. That's more than people just taking to social media and objecting. That means engagement. We have a hashtag here at the show. We say hashtag take it personally. My next guest is the embodiment of that. So for the very first time, I'd like to introduce Jody Stone. She is and this is a term she's profoundly uncomfortable with. She's an activist, an education activist. She's the mother of three here in East Greenwich, Rhode Island. Mm-hmm. Welcome to the Coalition.
Thank you for having me.
So you have three children.
I do.
They're at different levels in the public school systems.
Two are in the public school system. One is not any longer.
Okay. You live in arguably one of the nicer communities in the state. Mm-hmm. Economically, it's always been a bellwether. We all, for the rest of us who live in other places, we were always referred to as Borington and EG, mm-hmm. as the place to be.
Yeah.
We live in a nation where your educational prospects are often determined by your zip code, mm-hmm. and by birthright. Again, another issue for another night. But you find yourself facing the challenges that a lot of parents find themselves in now, in that waking up one day to the realization that their children process information and they learn differently.
Correct.
It's not a pejorative, it's not a negative, it's quite honestly, it's a mature assessment of a real world situation.
And it's everywhere equally.
Right. It knows no bounds. It knows no racial bounds. There are no sexual politics involved. Nope. It's not economic. Nope. Except at the same time, the ability to respond to these challenges, are so often economic. Again, another story for another day. But your particular field of burgeoning expertise, mm-hmm. Trial by fire, in a very large sense, has been dyslexia.
Correct.
And dyslexia is a situation that it's one of those learning challenges that people have really woken up to.
I like that you said learning challenge rather than learning disability.
No,
because I hate that word.
No, I refuse.
Far from a disability.
I refuse to use that word. Again, the importance here is that what we're going to have a discussion is how do we work with students who learn differently?
Right.
Not better, not worse. There's no judgment involved. Mm-hmm. It's simply a state of fact.
Right.
So you have two of your children
mm-hmm.
are dyslexic.
Two are.
Right. Let's discuss dyslexia.
Okay.
If you could define dyslexia for the greater community?
I mean, in the definition is long, but in short, it's a learning disability that is neurologically based, meaning it's a brain, you're born with it, in the functions of reading, the phonological process of reading written
Right.
words and processing language.
Right. So your ability, now very often folks look at the letters as backwards. That seems
Right.
to be
Yeah.
but it's much more than that.
Way more than that. It's fine.
Explain a little bit. So what situations have you run into?
Well, I can explain it. The best way for me to explain, and this is how I explain it. I saw this somewhere. There's a gentleman in Nantucket, I believe, or Martha's Vineyard, named Dean Brogner, and he explained this once in a video to me, and I was like, that's it. In our brain, we have these little mini columns. You'll call them mini columns because, like, just imagine two telephone poles. And in dyslexics, they are very far apart. So imagine like a telephone wire, and the information has to go across. And in dyslexics, they're long. Ours are far apart, and they're kind of windy and twisty. So the other example he gave was like in children with autism, they're very close together. So many, not all children with autism, but many are able to process things very quickly. Many are very good in math and processing information, and it happens very fast. So just to give you like the brain idea of why it takes dyslexics longer is that visual I'll give. The BD, everyone says that, it's like seeing BDP backwards or sideways. And it was like, I saw an example of, think of a chair. This is a chair. If I turn the chair upside down, it's still a chair. If I turn it sideways, like I would a P or an H, it's still a chair. It never changes. So to dyslexic, they learn the symbols. They don't know how to phonetically break down a word. And the reason this is a problem is because teachers that teach reading no longer teach children phonetically from very early on. There's been a shift. I think probably 20 or 30 years ago, I can't remember exactly, but it's now more like sight word based, and they try to teach children memorization. And so our children and dyslexics are very bright, so they can memorize certain words, but then by the time they get to second, third grade, they are gone. When you start reading to learn instead of learning to read,
Right.
they fall behind. And that's what is happening all across America and actually all over the world. There's activists everywhere. I learned now. And it's basically called the wait to fail method, and that's what's happening with dyslexic children. They're not being caught until they're in third grade when they are starting to read to learn,
Right.
and they can't do it. They've been able to mask it for so long.
And that's really the challenge, because so often outward behavioral characteristics, in a sense, very often in a sense exacerbated by the high intelligence levels of these kiddos, manifests itself so that it can be often misdiagnosed as any one of the alphabet soup that's more behavioral
Yes.
than it is in terms of processing information.
Correct.
And so as a result, in school systems around the country, it's not the kid who's actually very often borderline brilliant, it's a behavioral issue and
Yes.
addressed that way, or it's addressed through medication because it
Correct.
must be ADHD, fill in the blanks.
Right. And that was the experience with one of my children. My youngest had severe anxiety, terrible anxiety, was refusing to go to school, and it was debilitating to not only her but to the rest of our family. And it came to a point where it wasn't feasible anymore. It wasn't working for her or any of us.
Right.
And the schools are like, well, it's anxiety. Maybe we don't know what it is first. Is it the anxiety or is it the reading disability? And obviously, my opinion is it's the reading disability that causes
Right.
the behavior. Children just start to act out when they can't take it anymore.
Very often then those children are channeled into learning environments
Yep.
which ironically are not up to their potential.
Correct.
Because they're either considered difficult or it's behavioral or
Right.
it can be only treated by medication and segregation, if you will, from the community at large. Yet at the same time they stand to be the biggest beneficiaries both to the community and back if in fact that obstacle can be
Right.
overcome.
And what I've learned the hard way is, 2 years ago, if we'd had this interview, I would have been very angry
Right.
because I didn't understand the bigger picture issue of, it's not just my district and my town. I didn't realize that. So I would have been angry had we had this 2 years ago because I was. But I'm at the point now where I realize it's a bigger picture issue. It has got to be a top-down, a trickle-down effect. The teaching of learning hasn't caught up with the science. So the science now, the MRIs that are showing brain scans and how children learn to read and the difference between a dyslexic brain and a non-dyslexic brain and their reading ability. We know now that it can be caught before they enter kindergarten just by brain scans. These kids are already entering. And the teaching of learning, teaching colleges, weren't teaching about dyslexia for years. I've spoken to many special educators who have said to me, I had one class on that. So, our children right now in the system all across America are going to special education classes. Parents are fighting for those IEPs if they know how to do that,
Right.
and getting them like I did. And then they're being put with a teacher who doesn't have any training in dyslexia or how to teach children to read.
Full disclosure, my wife is Orton Gillingham certified, and I believe has been so for somewhere in the, she'll kill me, but somewhere in the 10 to 15 year range.
Right.
It's been, and was a reading specialist before re-entering the classroom as a third grade classroom teacher.
Right.
So in a very keen sense, she's ideally positioned to perform that intervention, if you will, if I can use that term, for students who are just entering
that's what
school.
it is. I mean, at this point, it's an intervention. It shouldn't be an intervention. It should be because all children can learn to read with OG, Orton Gillingham, but that's how we should be teaching all children to read.
Right.
But right now, it is considered an intervention.
Right, and usually it's, and the term very often uses specials. You go to a
Right, special school, because public school teachers and even public school reading specialists, not many, are trained in either the Wilson program or the Orton Gillingham program.
Right, and we'll get to a little details on OG in
Okay.
a little bit, but you touched on, and again, this is not, just to be perfectly clear, this is not an attempt to indict or to demonize the East Greenwich school system
Oh,
by any
at
measure,
all.
right? Nor to point out the flaws of any one teacher or anyone in
No, we
these
have
children's
great
history.
teachers. We have so many, and it's we've had a lot of turnover there this year. We've had a lot of, I think everybody in Rhode Island knows we've had a big year East Greenwich.
Yep.
But it's like this year's. It started on Wednesday. School started, and it's been a totally different environment. I think everybody's coming on board this year with a real positive, like, let's just get this right this year, and everyone's pretty positive. It doesn't change the fact that we, as far as I know yet, have OG certified teachers in our district, especially at the K through 3 level.
So let's go through the history then. In a sense, I'm not going to, let's not use you personally for the
Okay.
moment. Let's talk about we'll call it a typical, if there is such a thing as a typical special situation.
Okay.
As you mentioned, there's a primary difference in the approach of teaching reading, particularly in the primary levels where you're just teaching them to read.
Yeah.
There's really, that's the desired outcome. That's the goal. There's no expectation that, or no testing for anything to be developed from that reading. It's simply the focus is on primary skills in participating in a school environment.
Yes.
Basic penmanship, behavior, reading, the most fundamentals of math.
Do you know your alphabet?
Right,
That's, do
Right.
you know the sounds of your alphabet?
right. So, right now, you talk about IEPs, and
They're a funny thing, IEPs.
right. What typically, when does if there is such a thing, and I'm going to keep stressing it, if there is such a thing as a typical situation, when does a parent wake up to the recognition that they've got a challenge in front of them, that this isn't going to be easy?
It's like a twofold question. I think it's kind of leads to, it depends on the parent. If they're educated enough to and aware enough to look at what's going on in the school, I think you pick it up pretty quickly. It also is a trust level. You trust your schools, you trust your teachers. So it's a two kind of part question, but I think the majority of parents figure it out at about 3rd grade.
So is there anything, advice you, having lived through this yourself a couple of times,
Twice.
is there anything parents can be, because the challenge, as you know better than anyone, is you might have a dual income household, you might have a single income household with an at-home parent, but the challenges involved in running a household now are exponentially greater than they are associated in our parents, my parents' generation. You're younger than I am, your parents' generation. It's a whole different ballgame. Because the financial pressures placed upon the family unit are just extreme. So
Well, let me
it's
say-
hard to sort out
Right.
what can you do as a
I
parent?
feel like in fighting for my youngest child, I like gave up the rest of my family to get her where she is now. It was a crazy time in our lives. It's a lot. So what I get so upset about is, my kids now are in a place where they're good. I mean, they're good right now. But there are kids that I know that were with them in the beginning that are not. You have to be paying very close attention. You have to know the law. And the whole process is very eye-opening because you can't believe as you're going into it, you're like, well, that can't be right. This can't be, that can't be happening. And it's very eye-opening, and what you learn is, you learn one thing and you think you got it, and then you go back again and you're like, I thought they were getting that service. I thought she was getting reading services. She has an IEP. What do you mean she's not getting reading services? It's a learning, each single step parents learn something new. So I think for me, I was in a really excellent position for a reason. Everything happens for a reason. I had 2 children that are 1 year apart and 1 grade apart. So what I went through with my first child, who was not as severely dyslexic because dyslexia is on a spectrum of severity, I knew my youngest one was well worse than she was.
Right.
So what I learned with the first one going through it, I was able to apply to the second one, and so I was on her earlier, and the school was paying attention to her earlier, and I knew what to look for, and I knew not what to ask for, but not a lot of parents are that lucky. And since my experience, I've had parents from not my district, all over. I don't know how word's gotten out, but calling me just asking for advice because the law is so specific to parents' rights. And parents are oblivious to it. You trust your schools to, especially the ones like Barrington and East Greenwich, to be honest back with you and to treat you as a contemporary. And of course you're going to help my child and give them services. What do you mean?
Right.
Why would you not?
You're a professional. You expect professional behavior.
Right. You take your child to a doctor with a heart problem and you see a heart specialist who's going to help your child with their heart. If you take a child who is having trouble reading with a dyslexia diagnosis, you expect a reading specialist to help your child learn to read. Especially in a town like East Greenwich, you should have the best reading specialists.
With all the money we spend in this state, and I'm going to try not to lapse into the political tonight, we just came through a period a few years back where we literally tens of millions of dollars, what they call race to the top money was spent.
Yes.
Right? Are you telling me, is there no single resource, sort of a right to know, or a place to go, or within the Rhode Island Department of Education, and again, we're not taking shots, there's a whole new leadership team there.
Yep.
We're going to get to that in a few minutes as well, who seem to be at least ready for the challenge. But at this point in time, in year 2017, is there no comprehensive place, a parent of a first grader who might have an inkling that there might be an issue here, there might be a challenge, to go to?
I don't believe so. I mean, I'm not speaking about my district specifically. I'm speaking like just in general,
Right,
anywhere,
the
any
state,
school.
the Rhode Island
No,
Department of Education.
other than the Hamilton School at Wheeler, I don't
Right.
think there's much else right now. I shouldn't say that. There's RITES, the Rhode Island Tutorial Educational Services. They're fantastic.
Right.
With OG and helping kids and
Right.
Other than resources like Decoding Dyslexia Rhode Island and Suzanne Arena, who's done a wonderful job of helping getting the laws passed in July of 2016 for the training of teachers. There's not a lot of place for parents to go. So what happens is when your child is struggling to read and is not scoring appropriately on the benchmark exams, school districts are mandated under this child fine law to identify children that are struggling. They put them in RTI, which is response to intervention. Now, some school districts do it different because I have looked everywhere. I've really done my research. Some school districts are very good about it. They have all the information on their web pages. They explain everything to the parents. They get the parents sign off. But what RTI is where the district is supposed to be monitoring your child to see if they should be tested for a learning disability.
Right.
But every district does it different. There's not a lot of rigid guidelines and timelines and checking in on where we are with these children. So they sit there for a long time without proper identification, and it doesn't really help.
No, and time is of the essence.
Correct, especially with dyslexics. We know now The National Institute of Health, you can identify a dyslexic before the age of 5 with 97% accuracy. Every study that has been done, Boston Children's Hospitals, the Gab Lab, Harvard, Yale, all of them, early intervention is key. That we're K through 1, second grade at the latest is when we should be intervening with these kids, because you can change the brain. And when you catch them early, they stop getting embarrassed. They're not shameful. They carry around the shame. By second grade, a child knows they can't read. And then they just stop wanting to learn. They'll do anything to avoid learning. But, children love books. And if you see a child that is scared of a book or doesn't want to read, there's something wrong. There's something wrong there.
Right. And in so many, like so many other physical conditions, and dyslexia is a physical condition.
Yes, it's hereditary as well.
Right. Early intervention, and this is the irony, early intervention can end up saving the same school departments that are so seemingly annoyed in some cases, not all, but seemingly annoyed in some cases at having to expend extra effort.
Yes.
All right. That we can avoid a great deal of this through this early intervention.
Right, and what's frustrating for me when you look at the numbers and the 2016 Rhode Island kids count fact sheet says Rhode Island had 20,000 children with disabilities. So disabilities under federal law is 13 categories ranging like autism, hearing, visually impaired, and so on. Specific learning disability is dyslexia. OHI, other health impairment, is typically where they put ADHD kids.
Right.
There are, that's also where you put like children with diabetes that need insulin shots. It's like a health impairment. But the majority of children with specific learning disability, of the 20,000 in Rhode Island, almost 8,000 are specific learning disability. #dyslexia. The other OHI, I think, is about 3,000. But like sometimes schools will put, if their dyslexia numbers or SLD numbers are too high, they'll put kids in a OHI number. Like I have a child with a dyslexia diagnosis, and she is listed under OHI in my district, which so the numbers are skewed. So right now we're talking about 8, 9, 10, 12, it's like 12,000 children, 8, 9, 10, 13,000 children out of the 20 that have dyslexia, and we are doing nothing specific for them.
Right.
That is so frustrating.
Mm-hmm. Because again, you're literally you're engaging in an end game in terms of their intellectual development, not because of their capacity, not because of their desire, but simply because of then you're in a sense condemning them to a long-term.
A life of struggle.
Yeah, it's hard to even say because
it's shame. They carry shame with them, and there's been so many studies about it done, and I'm not embarrassed to say it. They carry shame around, and it's unacceptable that we know this. We know this, and we're doing nothing about it. We're doing nothing about it. I say 13,000 because there's so many kids sitting in there that are not even diagnosed. They're not put into the system at all.
We really have no idea.
We have no idea. The number, I think, is astounding. I think it's much greater than people like to realize, and we can't get districts to say the word, say even the word. Right.
And the two resources that you say that are so important in dyslexia intervention are both largely privately funded. I mean, I mean, you're looking at a private enterprise in form of the training school, and then in terms of Hamilton, you're looking at, by definition, because of its independence and the need to stand on its own financially, you're looking about a very, very expensive alternative.
Yes, that people can't afford.
Right.
They just can't afford.
I mean, the tuition would make a Moses Brown or Wheeler school parent cringe.
Yes, it's more than both.
Right. So. Clearly well beyond the capacity of many parents, not through desire, but simply financial means.
Which is frustrating, and it's frustrating for them. I've spoken to the people at Hamilton too. It's frustrating for everybody and the other parents there. Like, this shouldn't be an exclusive wealth right. It shouldn't be privileged. It should be all children. It's a civil rights issue to me. And I know other people are like, oh, civil rights, dyslexia is not a civil rights issue. It is the biggest educational civil rights issue that this country is facing. The fact that people don't say that and recognize it is crazy. A lot of people think dyslexia is like a rich person's disease, which makes my head want to explode, because the reality is the numbers aren't in the impoverished areas because those kids aren't being identified.
Right.
They're not there because they're not even being child found under mandate laws. They're just being totally ignored. So if we really looked at it, and if I could get people, which I've tried to get other people to look at it, that have a voice in this state, and they haven't yet, but if we really looked, if we looked at the Providences and all the other like outlying cities, those numbers would be astounding.
Right. To the point where it's really not the niche challenge that it's perceived at.
No,
it is really,
not in the least.
It's really a mainstream. It almost demands a mainstream educational approach because of the preponderance.
Yes.
Yeah. So you've got a student you've got a parent and you've got a student in first or second grade, and they're starting to identify these issues. In a typical school system, it's not just single out EG, but in a typical school system, what happens next? So you've got parents acting in isolation. There's an
that's what I'm trying to break. It shouldn't be isolation. It's the stigma and that I'm alone and I don't know what I'm doing that I'm working to stop. Because
there's a subtle form of class warfare that goes on, and it's not economic, it's children's abilities.
Yes.
I mean, it's, as someone whose children just survived the college application process, you see it firsthand.
Yes.
You see, and we're well removed from it, but just, it's a metaphor.
Right.
Because of the snobbery, if you will, that's employed by many. It's like, my children got into Harvard, or my children got in here and got in there.
Elitist.
Right. God bless you.
Yeah.
Because that was not just luck. I mean, it was not just hard work. There's an element there that your
in some cases.
No, right. But there's an element there that your child's learning path conformed to the processes that we use now. If they did not, your child may still be the wonderful, great kid that they are. They may still be very, very bright, but if not recognized, then again, they would be shunted aside into really, unless you can afford it, a second tier.
Yes.
There's second class educational systems.
And it's infuriates me.
Now, you talked about legislation that was passed where schools are effectively mandated.
They are.
Right.
The law is law.
Talk about that.
It's Rhode Island law. In July of 2016, the law was passed, the dyslexia bill. I believe it was Senator Will O'Brien. I think he's from North Providence. And Suzanne Arena was really behind that from Decoding Dyslexia Rhode Island. I mean, there's a Decoding Dyslexia in every single state. And it's a grassroots parent movement, and that's really been what's changing the tide in this country. And what eventually, in my opinion, will change the educational system and get these kids help eventually. My grandchildren won't have to go through what my children went through, I hope.
Right.
Because of this,
let me just jump in for a second. In the coming weeks, this is not just a one-shot deal. I hope to get people from Orton Gillingham in. I hope to get, I'm going to reach out to Hamilton people. I'm obviously familiar with this arena. I'd like to just make this kind of a recurring theme over the next few months so that folks don't just get a snapshot, even the in-depth one that you're providing tonight, but really start to understand how pervasive it is.
Right.
But
the legislation is passed that mandates teacher training on dyslexia. All teachers need training on dyslexia. All students, not just kindergarten students, need to be screened for dyslexia and remediated. The bill hasn't been funded. So districts, I go to my district and I'm at the school committee meeting and I'm like, what are we doing to train our teachers? The law just passed. Are we in compliance? And we're fortunate in East Greenwich. We have a great special education advisory committee. It's a SEAC. They're mandated. Every town has one. So go look for yours and get some help. That's where parents can go, actually.
And what's it called again?
The SEAC. It's a special education advisory committee. Every district in the state is mandated to have one to help parents. It's a parent-run organization. So we're very fortunate in East Greenwich. We have a great, very strong one there. So parents can go there. But, so our SEAC goes before our school committee pretty much at every meeting. It has something to say. But, when is this bill going to be funded? When are we going to get our teacher training? And they'll say to us, the state hasn't funded it. We can't train our teachers. Like, we don't have to go. Maybe you should go to the state and fight them. So, that's what actually made me start my Twitter account and where I started calling them out a little bit.
Your Twitter account is at
Dyslexic EG.
Right.
I wish I could change it now because I don't want it to just be EG, but I don't want to.
Right, and people can follow you there.
Yes, they can follow
you there, and this is the real world. This is not some abstract academic situation you're dealing
No,
with.
it's all over the world. It's not just my town. But so the bill is there. We have the bill. It's there. We were fortunate enough to have it passed. Not all states have it passed. Massachusetts is actually still fighting to get theirs passed. But it's not funded, so it's not happening.
Has anyone given you an idea on a budgetary level as to what it needs, how much money needs to be funded properly?
No, I haven't gotten there yet.
So people won't even address this. Again, now I'm gonna put you out of the picture for a second.
Okay.
And when I point to, we're not real big on cronyism here. We're not big on the state spending money on all these out-of-state corporations
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So hypothetically, a couple $1 million could go a long way
Yes.
towards an early intervention in our educational system, which would then in turn have the potential to save.
Right.
No.
So the Yale Center for Dyslexia has this statistic that says, so 80, and let me try to get this right, 80% of IEPs
Mm-hmm.
are for reading.
Right.
Of those 80, 85% of those are dyslexics.
Right.
If we intervened with those kids at the K level, right when they come in, every school district has a kindergarten screening. Are they kindergarten ready?
Mm-hmm.
They get a screen. You know right then. Also, maybe ask, does dyslexia run in your family? That's another key indicator.
Mm-hmm.
If we identify those kids and start intervening with them at the kindergarten, first grade level, they never enter our special education system. They never become special education kids. They never take the funding that all the other kids really need. We just need specific reading specialists that are trained in Orton Gillingham or Wilson to teach these kids to read at the very young level. And then they stop taking the dollars away. The money's freed up. So yes, it's a bigger expense up front to train these teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them are doing it on their own anyway. A lot of them
Right.
are like, they want to do it. They want to. And we're, again, very lucky in East Greenwich. I mean, the K-3 teachers in East Greenwich are great. But the way they do it is they pull those kids out that need extra help and give them to the one reading specialist.
Right.
They start pulling them out and separating them right away. So if we just start doing all these kids early, intervening early, we save hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right.
Statewide, I mean,
Untold millions.
yes.
And we don't essentially, segregate our children into some form of educational hell.
Right.
Right.
That isn't going to help them in the first place.
Right. So again, it's because if you get to the point where you're trying to compete in a university environment
Mm-hmm.
and you haven't had any sort of formal intervention at
Mm-hmm.
any level, you're really limited to, was it Landmark and a few other colleges are really the schools that are going to help you at that level. You've essentially closed off doors
Yes.
at an extreme level.
And horizons or hope. You've closed off the educational trajectory of a child
Right. Forever.
forever.
Doors closed.
And their ability, what they think that they can do.
Mm-hmm. A system like EG, and I'm only asking you not to vilify them, but because on one hand, it is a wealthy school system. We fund our
We're struggling there,
Well-
funds wise right now. We're pretty
but
tight.
relatively speaking,
Yeah,
you compare them to the, if you look across the landscape where we are right
yeah,
now.
you're right.
Roughly how many teachers do they have right now in EG that are East Greenwich that are OG certified?
So I don't know. I can't get that answer. So we've, we pushed for a dyslexia subcommittee about a year ago, which we did get approved through the SEAC. And we've been asking those questions. I've been asking those questions, and I hadn't been able to get a seat at the table. I've been asking, well, how many do we have? Can we reallocate? I know we do have some OG teachers. I did know that we had some about a year ago, but they were teaching something else in the schools within the school system. So at the time we've had a turnover in our special education director recently. So what I did know before, I don't know any longer. This was just this last week or two. We hired a new one. I haven't met her yet, but so I can't tell you what those numbers are. I don't think it's that many.
Right. So if a school system like yours or like Barrington, on the other hand too, I would imagine, now getting off here into a little bit of the hiring situation, but the way that we hire teachers in the community at this point doesn't lend well towards bringing into situations teachers who have that kind of advanced certification, because very often, at least right now, and this is changing, but right now this is a certification that a teacher usually pursues postmasters, perhaps not late in the career, but at a little bit more of an advanced level.
Right.
My question is, and this is just sort of a rhetorical one, because I'm not trying to put people on the spot, but my question is, you know, the way that we hire teachers doesn't lend itself well to bringing into school systems teachers who might be more expensive out from the get-go, as opposed to the homegrown efforts, many of whom are wonderful, but as you pointed out, lack the formal training. Or Gillingham is not an overnight process.
No, it takes a while.
It takes, and actually there's the educational process, I believe it's the Carroll School, that does it, but you also, to gain experience in it, is a multi-year process. You know, if you have the luxury as a teacher to go there and student teach under them, that's wonderful, but so many of the teachers that go there already have classroom commitments. So they're doing this either in their, you know, those summers that everyone talks about where teachers just hang out and work as bartenders. Yeah, not so much. No. So they have to go for this certification, and then there are skills.
And it's expensive,
Right.
by the way. And so it you know, I was trying to like brainstorm myself. I'm like, how can I like start a GoFundMe account to get to give it to teachers, to get them to want to be certified? Because a lot of them want to do it. They just don't have the time or the money.
Right. I mean, I don't know if folks really. I'm married to a teacher.
I know that.
All right, and so I get that what their workday really is, as opposed to what the urban legends say.
Right.
My wife works a 12-hour day. It's highly demanding, and if you're a reading specialist, it's intensively demanding because very often you're working with one or two students at a time on a micro-focused level with, now take your average, and by the way, I'm one of those people who's convinced all kids are great kids.
Yeah.
Until their parents screw them up.
I agree.
All right? Take your typical, the third or fourth grader that you know in your life, and imagine having to try to get them to engage in an alternative learning method, which we'll talk about in a minute, on a hyper-focused level for an hour in an afternoon, after they've spent an entire day at school.
Well, that's
kids.
the struggle, right?
Right.
Right. They're done after school.
Yeah.
Especially dyslexic kids that are just holding on by a thread all day.
Right. Right. And so this has to be incorporated into the school day.
It does.
This can't be. I mean, the folks in Pawtucket, for example, do have wonderful tutoring programs, both during summer and during the school year. But real successes are had if it's integrated into the everyday school experience, which is what the Hamilton School does.
Right.
I mean, but that's. Let me be clear. We are blessed that the Hamilton School, something like that, exists in a city like Providence.
We are. We need to take advantage of it, in my opinion.
But they're resources, because that's it, like our children's hospital. We take things like that for granted.
We do.
They really don't exist many places.
No, and I think before I had gone there, you know, in full disclosure, I went to Lincoln School, and I have family that went to Wheeler, so I knew about Hamilton. But still, I'd never been in Hamilton School before, and before I knew I had dyslexic children, I was like, oh, Hamilton, you know, that's like, it's like, you know, the Emerald City. It's, you know, to a parent, like if I ever had a child, God, I wish that had dyslexia. I hope I can afford to send them there.
Right.
But I've been in there now, and it is the Emerald City. It's amazing what goes on there, and what they're doing for these children, and how they're able to turn them around.
And this is an organization that, despite its high tuition, is, I say this in the best possible way, eking. I mean, these are people who are doing it for all the right reasons.
All the right reasons. There isn't a person in there
Right.
that isn't in it for these kids. I mean, it was amazing to see
Right.
and watch.
Right. The atmosphere is.
You'd expect like maybe elitism a little bit. None of it.
No, because, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but the very method by which Orton Gillingham is applied is by no means an elitist method.
Right, exactly. It's been around since 1932,
Right.
I think, or 4 it was created, and people still don't know what it is. I mean, it's a little frustrating.
You know, you talk about kids' love for reading. You know, the Lincoln School every year has one of the elite children's book festivals.
They do.
Every year. And and again, it's a privilege to have that in the town. So as a parent, when you go to that and you see the sheer unfettered joy of these children, and because not only do we have to be more effective in disseminating information about kids who are challenged in reading, I think we need to take examples like that where children who just find such sheer and utter joy in reading children's books at a high level. Because the Children's Book Festival in Lincoln doesn't do Disney. They don't do any of the pop stuff that you see whatsoever. there is an award, the Caldecott Award, which is essentially the
Yeah.
Academy Awards of children's
Books.
books, and a number of those authors that have won there actually visit there. So if folks get a chance to go to that this year,
Yeah.
they really, really
Yeah,
need
it's great.
to. Because it's got to be frustrating as hell to go to that, understanding that kids who are dyslexic desperately want to be part of that
Right.
culture.
And I don't want to digress because I can go on forever and ever. But like, for me, it's like, because I have one of those children, and I volunteered at the schools, and I volunteered in the library at the schools, and my child can't read. Like, I'm like, and I look around the library, and unless you have this perspective, you see things totally differently when you have a dyslexic child that's struggling to read and get through the day. But I'm like, my child's not going to be able to go through here and find the A, because they're categorized by like A's alphabetically, A's, B, C. I'm like, she's not going to be able to find that. Where are the books, like the graphic novels that she can read?
Right.
Where are the books that's at her level? Because she's in third grade and not reading close to a third grade level. What is she going to pick out? It's an embarrassment for her all day long.
Right.
So, for me, it's like, as a parent, I think of every area of her life and all these kids' lives that they are just feeling embarrassed, that they're hiding from their peers all day long, that other people, and even some of my close friends and family, don't know or see that I witness. And my heart breaks for other kids. I can see a kid now sometimes in a library, and I know.
Right. So a parent, let's dial back that. A parent that is starting to recognize some telltale signs,
Yeah.
either through their personal experiences or through perhaps friends, family, professionals. The IEP. There are people who are listening to this who have never heard of IEP. Talk about the IEP.
It's an independent educational plan. It's a legal document that your child is given when they are officially diagnosed with a learning disability or a learning challenge or a behavioral issue or what have you. There's a lot of different reasons why they get them, but in it goes your child gets tested for their present level ability, and then they give them goals. So the goal is to always bring them up to grade level reading. It's supposed to be measurable goals. And
right.
As you know, I don't know if you know, but we probably do. The Supreme Court, they just had a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court about what is actual measurable progress. What is progress for an IEP? And it's disputed in a lot of cases. You'll hear often, an IEP and school districts need to give kids a civic education, not a Cadillac education.
Right.
So they put like minimal progress in. So the Supreme Court just came out, I think it was in June, the ruling was, I can't really recall, I think it was before school got out, that it needs to be more than just minimal. It needs to be a substantial, if you're giving your child an IEP, they need to be able to be catching up. And so what goes into an IEP are goals. Goals that the teachers and the special educators are to try to get your child to move them up, to catch them up to their peers, is what an IEP is.
Right. So it crystallizes
In short.
in need and gives it a legal standing, if you will,
Right.
to the child's current situation and what is appropriate for the child to be, in a sense, presented with in order to bring them up to an attainable, measurable, improved level.
Right.
Which is why so many school systems probably fight like hell
Yes, they do.
not
It's really hard
to
get one.
crystallize and create an IEP.
And it's hard to get one, and then when you get one, it's hard to get what you want in it. But you don't know that at first. That takes some time too.
Right.
Yes, it's very difficult. But the way I think of it, and not a lot of people, I haven't found a lot of educators that agree with this statement or don't like to admit it, but an IEP is a legal document. I think of it as a medical file. It is a medical file. If I leave that district, if let's say I moved to Warwick, and my child has an IEP, everything that's in there, I need to bring to her new team. Let's compare it to doctors, but it's like her new team of educators. Everything should be in there that they know about her, right? And typically schools do not like to put all of that information in there because they are then held accountable for what's in that legal document. So parents, once they get to that point, realize, oh, this doesn't say dyslexia in it. Why would you not put the diagnosis of what my child has in this IEP? But they don't.
Right. Because the other issue is statistics.
Right.
And school districts live and die, and their funding exists in many cases by the politicization of statistics.
Correct.
And so, if bad timing, bad choice of words, but I'll say it anyway, if it's Houston, we have a problem.
Yeah.
And there are many, many cases of it. for God only knows what reason. And let's go back to our earliest remarks in the conversation where dyslexia knows no racial, religious, sexual, political, social, sports, franchise bounds, nothing.
No.
Right? That it is simply a condition that exists.
And has nothing to do with intelligence.
Right, exactly. It astonishes me that in the year 2017, that in a variety of states, in a variety of cities, based on the political climate, based on how education is funded, that is still seen as a political football.
Yeah,
when
it's
in
really
fact,
frustrating.
you would never ever do that if the child had, God forbid, a serious physical malady. You know, if a child, God forbid, had diabetes, type 2 diabetes.
Or if the majority of children in your district had diabetes,
Right.
if almost 40% of the kids in your district had diabetes, the town would be up in arms. We have a problem. Why aren't we fixing this? But, those kids have a reading problem. 40% of the kids in special education have a reading problem, but we're just going to ignore that totally.
Right, because by failing to coalesce around those statistics, it becomes your
My problem.
not the system.
And so we get another sports team or what have you for whatever else, but we can't get a reading specialist or a curriculum director or any of that stuff.
Isn't it truism? You know, I often joust with a guy named Dan York on WPRO, but one of the few things that we agree on, and he's a good fellow, is that parents take away the football budget, and I could see the villagers coming up the hill with the lit torches.
And look, my kids play sports, so I'm all for that.
Right, who isn't?
But yes, I agree. It's a frustration.
A curriculum committee, you'll hear crickets.
Yes.
And then take it one level further. The only time you hear educational budgets that surround issues like dyslexia, it's often based on taxpayer complaints at the annual budget hearings, as opposed to meetings of substance throughout the year.
And in towns, this is a stigma that I think, and I don't know this for a fact, but my opinion would be that I would assume that in towns like Barrington and East Greenwich, there is that stigma. There are those parents that really, they don't want people to know that their child might be struggling a little bit. I personally don't have that, but I think that's unique to me, to be honest.
No, I would agree with you, because I mean,
so they don't
there's
get the kids the help. They're scared to ask. They don't know what to do. They might be embarrassed, and they shouldn't be, because chances are your child is so smart, and you're just hindering it by not just identifying it and telling them what it is.
just fix the problem and unleash it.
Yeah.
Unleash the brilliance, unleash the child's true nature.
Yeah.
I would agree with you that there are communities that are hell bent on success. You know, town and let's use some Massachusetts examples. You know, I worked in Needham for a number of years, and I always called Needham Wellesley Light, because people in Needham so desperately wanted to be Wellesley. And the school systems, there was, tragically, for a number of years, it was actually a teenage suicide problem that was tied in large part to the outsized expectations that helicopter-type parents had over kids who were great kids, not challenged, you know, just great kids who weren't facing a lot of these challenges, lived in an economically upscale community. But again, parents roll back their desires on their children educationally, not understanding what a challenge it is in America today to get into the top universities.
Yeah.
That these elite schools are world institutions now. Again, another show, another subject. But so schools, when I talk about roadblocks, you know, Darrell Gould, a friend of mine and a political activist that I know, was in the studio a few weeks ago, a couple months ago at this point, talking about some of the challenges that he had encountered with regard to testing, if you will, the type of standardized testing. You know, in the Warren School District.
It's a lot of testing.
Right, a lot of testing. We absolutely teach to the test now.
Yes, we do. And the teachers, I mean, my heart breaks for my heart breaks for my children, but the teachers too. It frustrates them as well. I mean, I'm seeing it every day.
Right.
It's frustrating to the teachers.
But what came out of this was a wellspring of emotions from people who had run into a variety of challenges in the Warren School District, not the least of which was, again, the difficulty in getting the IEP. Anecdotally, you know, and here's the problem, because so much of this is surrounded by exactly what we talk about: shame, confusion, chaos. You're isolated intentionally in some cases by the system, but anecdotally, there were stories of single parents who, if they were late for a meeting, derailed the entire IEP process.
Yeah, well, and that's because parents probably don't know their rights. They can't end a meeting without your permission.
Right.
A lot of parents think they just have an hour, and they'll be like, oh, we have another one coming up. But they won't get up. If you sit there, they're not going to move because they can't end that meeting until you end the meeting or all agree to end the meeting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, and this is all incorporated into the 2016 legislation, or is this
No, this is
variety?
the idea. This is IDEA law.
Federal law.
Federal law.
Okay.
Federal law trumps everything. And a lot of parents don't know. They should, like any parent that has a child with an IEP should know their rights, their parental rights under
Right.
IDEA.
And again, the challenge is, quite honestly, finding them out.
Yeah, because you don't know. And so you trust. And then like me, you go back and you read the law and you're like, oh, well, this didn't happen the way it was supposed to happen under the law. So why? But the minute schools know that you know, everything starts to work a lot smoother.
Right, and it's interesting because there's an entire area of legal practices that have popped up around IEPs.
Yeah.
I mean, there are lawyers now out there specializing
I know.
in enforcing.
IEPs.
Right.
Well, and that's the part, to be honest, I'm not good at. I am not good at making sure that my children are making progress. Like, you have to literally have like a doctorate in how to score all those things to understand what it means. So, I mean, I still have, that's this year's challenge. Have me back on next year and I'll be able to explain that. But I don't know how to, it's very difficult.
But you're a layperson.
Right.
You're a highly educated, highly motivated, diligent layperson who is chosen for the good of all of us to immerse herself in this and has chosen to share it with the community.
Well, because if it's happening to me and my kids,
Right.
I cannot imagine the rest of the parents and children that this is happening to.
Right, because ultimately, personally, I'm a libertarian. I'm not a huge fan of public education at any level, and particularly where I live in Cumberland, where I have had spent more money than I can reasonably afford to make sure that my children aren't in the Cumberland school systems. So I, quite frankly, am a fan of choice at every level. I'm a fan of competition. I'm a fan of private alternatives, anything you can do, because my frustration here, and I'd love your reaction to this, my frustration is that there's an entire army of consultants, of experts, of academicians, of vice principals, an entire cottage industry in merely maintaining the status quo.
Well, I don't know that I agree with it fully. I think that, yes, I think there's a generation of individuals that are like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of the newer teachers that are coming out from teaching colleges that have this, really do want change.
Mm-hmm.
Young principals are being hired and assistant principals are being hired. But, I'll take it back. Until it's a trickle-down effect, and until the top signals we're going to start changing these things, nothing's going to happen. It's going to be the status quo. So it really all stems from, the Department of Education, in my opinion.
Right, which you have actively engaged with the Department of Education. So tell us a little bit about that. There's a new big cheese in town, if you will.
Yeah, Commissioner Wagner, I did. I wouldn't say like we're not like friends or anything, but I
Right,
did. I opened my email one day and I had an invitation from the commissioner's office to come in to discuss dyslexia and literacy. And so, after I sat there for a few minutes, like, it's a joke? What? I was like, I actually didn't respond for a little bit, but because I was shocked. And then I responded and was like, sure. Mm-hmm. I don't really know why you want to talk to me, because I don't see myself as, I guess I'm seen on Twitter, I guess. I don't see myself as somebody that would get his attention, even though I've been tagging around Department of Education and a lot of things.
Yeah, but to his credit,
he reached out to me, and it was amazing. And I went and I met with him, and it was a great meeting. I think I can't speak specifically to what we spoke about, but in detail, because there's no promises. But I think he's very smart. I was very impressed. The fact that he acknowledged me, I think, was huge in the first place, and he said dyslexia. And he actually gave a speech or wrote something a few weeks after that and used the word. I think he's open to it. I think there's unique challenges, which is interesting because I understand those now where I didn't before. You're changing the whole teaching profession in the state. That's a difficult thing to do, to change an entire state's guidelines for teachers. But if they're doing it in Virginia, which they just did, and California and Arkansas and Alabama and all these other states, we can do it here. We can do it in Rhode Island. And I think if anybody can, he can. He has a lot of, it's Rhode Island. He's got to get through the Senate to get that bill funded. How do you do that?
Right. Well, political pressure, which is...
Well, which comes from a grassroots movement. So, I would tell anybody listening to this to reach out to Decoding Dyslexia, or if you're in another state, to reach out to yours. Some are a lot stronger than others. But if you have a SEAC in your Special Education Advisory Committee in your district, go to them, speak up, because that's the only way it's going to happen for these kids.
Right, so that sounds like it's almost the very first step. Once there's an initial recognition that there's an issue, you, in a sense, for two reasons. Number one, because they can be a valuable resource. Number two, I believe it's very important that you carefully document the steps that you're taking place.
Yeah.
All right, in order so that if you have to become that squeaky wheel, as so many people do. I mean, my wife's a reading specialist. I could tell you legions of people that I've met that have gone through this battle, and where I give you a lot of credit is because you're opening up a lot of doors to people. The first step for parents is often the recognition that they're not alone.
Right.
Right. So, that committee...
And because everyone's so silent, and like the schools will typically just be like, I don't see that much of a problem. Like, okay, so you feel as a parent, and I didn't realize this until I started researching it, everywhere, every parent feels the same. Like, they make you feel like you're the one that's wrong.
Right.
And so I felt crazy for years until I got to Hamilton, and they were like, oh no, you're not crazy.
Right.
You are dead on with this child. This school was built for her.
Right. So let's talk about what a reading specialist actually has meant to your children. All right. First of all, obviously, on its most superficial level, you've got individualized trained attention to a target area that needs work.
Yes.
That
for reading specialists.
That alone is incredible. I mean, that takes a teacher who is often in many school systems stressed beyond belief.
Yeah.
You've got all sorts of kids in a public school system.
Right, because it's least restrictive environment, which means you can't put a child, whether it's behavioral or whatever, in a secluded area. They have to be educated in the same environment, which I get and I'm for, to the extent that it's not just the teacher's not distracting from the teacher's ability to teach.
Right. Right.
But I don't think that's happening in all cases.
Right. So you've got all sorts of challenges in the classroom. How is it possible for them
It's not.
to pay that type of attention?
In a public school setting right now, it's not.
Right. Talk about Orton Gillingham. Now your child, you have
My daughter Emerson is my shouldn't use her name, but my middle daughter is in the East Greenwich school system, and she's getting the Wilson system. She's been getting the Wilson system since she was in 3rd grade. And she sees a reading specialist 4 times a week for, I think, 30 minutes. And she's still struggling, but she's much better than where she was. My youngest, who is at Hamilton, gets OG every day for an hour. She saw an OG specialist all summer long, and she's doing great. I mean, her spelling is still atrocious because it's phonetic spelling, which is the biggest sign of dyslexia, is spelling, not reading, actually. But she's reading.
Right. Talk about some of the sensory methods and how they teach, how OG works.
So, and you can probably speak to it more than I can, to be honest with you, because I am not an OG specialist.
Right.
But it's very sensory. It's like multimodal is what they call it. So it's like a three you're giving the child like the sight, the feel of it. They're doing something like an activity, and the hearing of it. So they're doing 3 different things to get the words, and they break everything down phonetically, and they take it in steps. So she knows rules. Like, my daughter knows more about Orton Gillingham than I do. Like, she'll say, oh no, Mom, that's a CVC. And I'm like, what is that? And she's like, consonant, vowel, consonant. And I'm like, what? How do you can't even spell, and you can say consonant. Like, I can't, what is a consonant at this point? Like, I don't even remember. But so she can break those down. So that's, Orton Gillingham breaks it down phonetically. So children learn the rules of language, and that's how they remember it. And that way they can use those rules when they're reading any word. They can break down a 10-syllable word or a 2.
Right.
If you're using sight words and memorization, it's not going to work with dyslexic children.
I get a kick out of the tactile thing about the shaving cream.
Oh, the shaving, they love the shaving cream. Because they'll write it, because they'll feel it, because that helps them think about it when they're trying to think of the word. Because it takes them longer to do everything. So doing those 3 things gives them tricks and tips on how to remember how to use the words and get it to the forefront.
Folks, if you're just joining us, you're part of an extended conversation I'm having with Jody Stone. She's a parent, she's an activist, she has immersed herself in the world of dyslexia. Two of our children are dyslexics. They're both involved in both public and private education here in the state. We've been talking about the legislation on a federal level, on a state level that is in place. Its level of usage, its level of activation is obviously in high question here, but we're talking also about the early intervention that can accomplish so much in, well, let's just say derailing dyslexia.
I like that.
We can get involved early on, or we can wish upon a star and hope it goes away,
Right.
and it won't.
And what scares me the most, and I don't know how much time I have, but is, everything's going towards right now, third grade reading. And, there's some states like North Carolina, like if you can't read at grade level by third grade, you're held back, which is called retention. Retention is not an intervention.
Right.
Holding a child back and using the same methodologies to teach
Right.
them is not going to help the child
No.
at all. So I'm actually in a panic, and I don't know enough about it, but I'm hearing things in Rhode Island about third grade and reading by third grade, and if it scares me, because unless we have trained teachers and unless we're going to change the intervention model that we're using with these kids, it's going to be a waste of our money
Right.
and time, and it's going to do nothing for these kids.
Right. I mean, because there's such a wave of public sentiment against what they call social promotion, it's very easy to lump all these other issues into one easily accessible idea,
Right.
regardless how right or wrong that idea is. And that essentially is nothing more than extrapolation of the issues that you face. I mean, for most parents, I happen to be married to a teacher. If you're not married to a teacher, particularly a reading teacher, I mean, I would have no idea which books my children should be reading.
Right.
I mean, I'd be the guy thinking I was doing a great job and giving them whatever, no knock on Disney, but whatever Disney
Right.
princess book was, because I simply wouldn't know any better. It's, I'm a Harry Potter fan, so, I consider teaching to be sort of the dark arts, because I think that not the teaching community, but I'll call it the professional administration of teaching, that community has done a disservice to the community by obfuscating a lot of the key issues behind jargon, terminology, accessibility. I won't go completely cynical on you because I am.
But you can. You can go.
Okay, so clearly they want to ascribe this mysterious element to it. I believe, particularly at the top level, where those who can teach and those who can't become administrators, that it's very many cases it's job and budget preservation. You have this enormous amount. I mean, we're talking about the millions of dollars that we're going to save the Rhode Island school system. Just a few years ago, the race to the top,
Yeah.
or as we called it, the race to the bottom. Where did that money go?
I don't know. I haven't looked into that yet. I probably will get there at some point.
Well, please.
If you know me, I can't stop myself, but I haven't gotten there yet.
But that's what I talk about political amnesia. If you get there, please let me know.
I probably will get there.
Because I'm really interested in that. Because we're talking about tens of millions of dollars that we essentially short-circuited our entire educational process for in terms of standardized testing and everything in order to qualify for it. Yet now that a certain individual left town and went back to Omaha or wherever she is now, never guessed.
Kansas? I'm not.
To me, it's flyover.
But let's say this: our reading for third grader in Rhode Island, the reading proficiency rate for third graders is 37%. 37%.
Right.
37%. That is insane, and we're not changing the conversation
right.
about how to intervene with these kids.
And we are spending an enormous amount of money in this state. That is not for lack of spending. It's just a question of how the money is spent.
And yes, and then I'm also hearing, and I'm like diverting here because I just want to get this in. Is like it's dyslexia, and especially when we're talking about lower income areas, or it's the pipeline to prison is what they call it.
Oh, absolutely.
These children, and people
glad you
think
went
I'm
through
crazy, and then I started because that's where I'm going now, is I'm realizing states and the country in general are taking this as two different issues. The cycle of poverty and illiteracy and prison rates, and just literacy. It's the same problem. The cycle of poverty, to break that cycle, it's literacy. And why aren't we educating those children with Orton Gillingham or a systematic way of
right.
reading? Why aren't we in prisons? I mean, the prison population, there's a woman on Twitter, I don't know if you follow her, but you should. It's at Read or Prison. I think her name is Debbie Myers. She's amazing. I follow a lot of what she does. And she is hugely into studying how dyslexia is ridiculously undiagnosed in our prison populations. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing to me that these dots have not been connected. It's really not rocket science. It's very clear to see. Let's start teaching these kids how to read phonetically, systematically, all of them, all over the country, mm-hmm. from the beginning. And we break every stigma, every percentage, and the prison population problem in this mm-hmm. country, is my opinion.
Right, because ultimately, if you cut off the learning process at the 3rd or 4th grade, what future do these children have at any level?
Exactly. And they take the point of least resistance.
So the question is, rather than selectively make Orton Gillingham the rule for the few, why not? And
it should be for everybody.
If we do it for everyone.
Mm-hmm. And what do we got to lose? We're at 37% here in Rhode Island, and that's statistically across the country. There's not many states that are much higher. I mean, it's stagnant across the country right now.
Right. So and this is my frustration, because at a certain point, we, I call it as a body politic, whether it be the educational system or any one of a number of issues, particularly here in Rhode Island, we have to look at each other in the eye and just accept one simple fact. If we can accept this one simple fact, change can happen. And that simple fact is that on just about every level, nothing is working.
Correct.
No, and that can come across as sarcastic and cynical. It's not meant to be.
No, and a lot of people just want to be like, let's be positive.
No.
We can be, and we should be in a certain level, but let's just have hope. Let's not be positive. Well, there's nothing to be positive about at the moment, right. In my opinion, where we are with our reading proficiency rates in this state, but because we're not doing anything to fix it, we're not addressing it head on.
There's Pollyannish,
mm-hmm.
and then there's practical.
Right.
Right. Now, problem recognition it's a cliche, but is the first step to problem resolution.
And it's amazing to me, and I sometimes feel like I'm the problem. I do, because I'm like, no one acknowledges this is a problem. Am I the only? I can't be the only person that sees this. This is why I was shocked by your request or in the commissioner's request. I can't be the only person that sees this problem, but nobody around me likes to talk about it.
Well, because again, my words, not yours. There are sacred cows here involved. There's an awful lot of money. Without going on the
I'd like your opinion on why you think
the libertarian thing for a moment here. Government begets more government, begets more bureaucracy, begets more structure. A case we use all the time in the last few months. Someone decided a couple of years ago that it was a really great idea to create what they call prescription database monitoring
mm-hmm.
system. Right?
I don't like that.
Right, really great idea. Okay, frankly, I thought the idea stunk. I didn't know a lot about it at the time. It was one of those things that flew over my head. What happens when governments create databases like that? They don't keep the information so that in an emergency you break glass. No, this year, Governor Raimondo signed into law mm-hmm. warrantless searches of the prescription database monitoring system. Now, there was no, we had the ACLU on here, the Rhode Island Medical Society. There was no documented information, no documentation, if you will, that when in cases where a warrant was needed, the judiciary was preventing law enforcement from getting those warrants.
Yeah.
But instead, now they can do whatever they want.
I don't agree with that law at all.
So when government creates these departments,
right.
The biggest fear, and it's a subcurrent, I don't even know if anyone would ever say it or admit to it, but the biggest fear is what happens if they solve a problem.
Well, I agree with that.
Because then it's all about, as we say here in the coalition, the do-re-mi. Mm. Because you've got a lot of folks, and cannabis legalization, there are a group of people here in the state, mm-hmm. and I've named them before, who are actively working in delaying the legalization of cannabis based on erroneous data, flawed logic, which is fine until you ask them the magic question, how do you make a living? I get funded to fight drugs.
Right.
So if cannabis is legalized, now let's take it to education.
Well, and I can say that because I know where you're going with this. I as a layperson, as just a parent that was just trying to figure stuff out, you get to a point where you're like, what? It's like so mind-numbing. What is the roadblock? And then I'm like, it has to be like government. Like why, special education is a big business.
Big business, a lot of money. I mean,
but so it's like higher. The problem is way above my district or any district or Rhode Island or even federally. It's lobbyists, which I didn't really realize. So it's like I can't take it. I can't take my fight that far.
It's big pharma.
Yeah, I mean I can't. The fight never ends.
Look at a situation like New Haven. I mean, 10 years ago, one of the only places to get tested was you went down to New Haven.
Right. I didn't know that until someone filled me in on that recently.
Right. You know, obviously that's changed, but 10 years ago, you know, my way of telling so-and-so isn't going to be in class today because they're going to New Haven for the day.
I mean,
so they made a lot of money.
Which costs a lot of money. Which brings me back to the civil rights issue of this is I had the money to have my daughter tested. There are other kids that do not. And if you don't get that diagnosis that says dyslexia, they're not going to specifically give your child, though. Your child won't qualify for OG or Wilson under the special education program.
Right.
They'll just have a reading problem.
Right, and then
which is insane. It's insane.
Right, because ultimately they're going to send the child to a special education mecca, perhaps like a Rehoboth school system, which has got all sorts of.
And they do.
Yeah, just I mean there are Rehoboth Dighton are a destination school system for this, and they will spend an inordinate amount of money. So from a simple management perspective, if this is through advances in neurosciences, advances in psychology, advances in all these perspectives, let's deal with it now. We're adults.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it would be crazy. It would be like letting our highways fall apart. That's sorry.
Good segue.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the pathology of the state of Rhode Island is to go after silver bullets, go after Hail Mary passes, while letting the basics fall apart. And unfortunately, that's what we've woken up to. Mm-hmm. And we've woken up to the cost of it. We've got a failed educational system. I'm beyond the point of feeling like I have to vilify anyone. It's not personal. It's a frank assessment.
No, it's not anyone that's here currently serving's fault. It's just.
It's a frank assessment of where we're at.
But I do think we possibly have a person that I got a little bit of faith. I got a little bit of faith.
No, that's.
I mean, I'm not going to see it with my children. This is years and years and years. I think it took California. I mean, California just last August 15th issued their dyslexia guidelines. I mean, there are like probably 20 states that have them. We're the smallest state in the country. Why can't we should have one?
Well, because ultimately, my joke is always, maybe not in this case because Massachusetts is still working on it, but let's pick out one or two states that are successful and let's just do whatever they do. Well, let's not even think about it. They pass a law. Come on, shoot it over, fax it over, email it. Okay, do a auto search. Instead of saying Colorado, just substitute Rhode Island.
Right.
There's an element to this at a certain point because we continue to beat ourselves with the same issues, and this is just one of the more dramatic personifications of it that I've seen since I've become politically active. It's ludicrous. It makes no sense. And here's the problem. You know, there's an element in school systems today, and I love your reflection on this, that says, well, listen, you're a parent, work alongside with us and we'll fix this together. Wait a minute, Sparky. You know, I'm thinking that the property taxes in EG aren't a light touch on the wallet. All right. So I'm not interested in first of all, I'm not interested in government at all. But if in fact I'm going to pay for it, then damn it, do the right thing and do it well.
Right. Well, that's what you expect when you move to towns like that, and they're struggling. They're struggling with it.
You're paying the freight for this, so the question is where is the money going? And we know where. In a variety of cases, it's just being wasted. While common sense application of educational tenets can be applied, that would instantly make an entire generation like that.
Instantly.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a lot, especially, you know, we have 4, you know, East Greenwich is small for my district specifically, which we have 4 elementary schools and 2 K through 3. Mm-hmm. So, or K through 2, I'm sorry. Let's start there. For me, I don't know how other districts break them up differently, but we have 2 K through 2s. Like, that's not hard.
Right, let's start tomorrow.
Well,
yeah. I mean, just you know.
If you can get someone on my school committee to say dyslexia in a school committee meeting, then.
Well, I mean, but you see, it's interesting. I'll use an example from a private school environment. Imagine this: a private school which woke up to the realization one day that a number of its foreign language teachers also spoke Arabic. So that private school said, let's start an Arabic
Let's
program.
teach Arabic.
The next year, they started an Arabic program. No oversimplifying, obviously, but they agreed on the curriculum, they analyzed the textbooks, and,
Well, curriculum, that's the key thing.
and a year later, or so, they had an Arabic program. So much that it was so successful, it's not going to ever be the biggest program in the school. It takes kind of a special combination of
Yeah.
interest and talents for a kiddo to engage in that, particularly in ninth grade.
Right.
All right? But imagine, if you will, 7 or 8 years later, a student graduates from that school and attends an Ivy League university and gets placed out of part of her freshman year Arabic course because her damn 4 years at the prep school were good enough, utilizing existing teaching talent, all right, to actually place her out of first semester freshman Arabic, a class, by the way, which was also populated with graduate students from that Ivy League University School of Diplomacy. That's how quickly you can
Yes,
change things if
very
you want
quickly.
to. It is a case of break glass, here's the hammer, set off the alarm, make the change, damn it, and just do it.
Right.
Because this is my frustration. What could possibly be worse than what you have now?
Well, yeah, exactly. My schools were created to teach children to read and write. That's it. It is the fundamental job of schools,
Right.
fundamental first to read, to teach children to read. If you are failing there, nothing else should matter. And we are failing as a state, as districts in this state, everybody is. Why are we not looking at this and being honest and addressing it? That is my biggest concern. Schools, I don't want. I go to school committee meetings. I listen to the news. Schools are fighting over this or that or whatever else new initiative is coming up. Our children aren't learning to read appropriately at rates that are astounding, 30-40%, and you're still not addressing it. I don't know how they get away with it. I don't know how they get away with it.
It's, in my words, not yours, and I use this very carefully, we have found ourselves in the wake of nothing less than an educational holocaust in this state. We've got an entire generation of children who are, despite what a lot of people claim, who are all good kids.
Oh,
Some of them may have been raised by wolves, but they're all great kids, all right? Who frankly, from their parents, and our parents ultimately, and you're an embodiment of someone fighting the system for good, but their parents are ultimately responsible for creating an environment in which they can succeed. And we have failed at that.
We have.
And the results, the implications, the effects have been nothing short of staggering.
They're staggering.
People
People don't look at the numbers, or they don't believe. They think you're exaggerating. I mean, I've seen it. I've seen the numbers. We have a wonderful woman on our SEAC who's great with data, and I used to at first be like, oh, more data. But thank God, she showed it to me because when I needed it, it was there, and I can use it, and it's astounding. I don't know how we're not addressing the needs of these kids.
Because ultimately, these children, in their later stages, they go from tots to teens, as we like to say in my household. Many of them are only borderline employable, and are functionally unable to compete in an ever more challenging economic, universal, international world. It's no longer, I'm not even talking about competing for the best universities. If you're competing for an Ivy League school, you're no longer competing with a kid from Chicago or San Francisco. You're competing with a kid from London, from China, Russia. That's international. I'm talking about being able to compete at a functional level in society. And on so many levels, our generation, not somebody else in somewhere else, and it's always somebody else failed, not me. It wasn't my fault. We have failed these children. And it's time to have a frank assessment of that, accept it, and come up with some immediate changes.
Yeah, immediate, and not to be scared to take it on. I mean, I'm looking for someone who's not going to be scared to take it on. They're hard to find.
My hat's off to you. I wish you nothing but the best for your children.
Thank you.
We're going to talk again, and we're going to spend some time on this fall. We're going to get people in when they can. The challenge for folks like you is that you've got families and households and businesses and jobs, and and yet you find time to do something like this. We've had, over the 2 or 3 year history of this show, we've had dozens of people in who amaze me, because they are, to me, the ultimate form of patriotism, in addition to fighting for your country, is folks like yourself who are citizens activists, whether it be at the volunteer level, or be the town council level, all the folks who give a damn and are simply doing things because they're the right things to do. We as a state have to find ways to shine a spotlight not only on the efforts but the motivations of folks like this, so that we can encourage other people to become involved at a higher level. It's difficult to do. Not everyone can do it. But at the same time, we have to, as a society in this state, be supportive of those people who can. So certainly keep us in the loop, whatever, from our own little B-list, little hangout here on the sunny way Boston Street that we can do to amplify your concerns and your issues. We'll be happy to do.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
No, because nothing less than the future of the state is at stake. And that's a term that's often used for all sorts of issues, but listen, the stupidity about stadiums and tolls, they're going to come, they're going to go. Talk all you want about economic commerce corporations and grants and investments in this, investments in that. Fundamentally, if we continue to fail our children, not if we fail our children, if we continue to fail our children at the level that we're doing, which seems to be increasing at an exponential rate, then none of this other crap's going to matter.
Nope.
Simply not. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
No,
I really appreciate it.
Even great. Folks, you've been listening to Jody Stone. She is I'm going to call you an activist.
Okay.
That's tough. Too bad. You're a community activist, immersed in our state's educational system, fighting initially for her children and then recognizing the bigger challenges at large, working on behalf of children in this state to bring exposure, to bring research, to bring focus, to bring resources to a challenge that so many of our kiddos face, and of course that's dyslexia. It's, the frustration here, I think, as she's expressed very well, is that it's not an insurmountable challenge. We're not talking about disease, we're not talking about incurable ailments. The frustration here is that a reshift, a reboot of how we teach our children at the youngest ages will benefit not only the child who has this challenge, but quite frankly, all children, and it ultimately will benefit all of us. She's someone who clearly takes it personally. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll see you again soon.
Hope so.